But anyway, yeah, so Acts chapter 8, and the Lord, again, and just in His sovereignty, changed this message last night while we were praying with our intercessory prayer team, and all that was going on that I didn't know about. The Lord just spoke very clearly to my heart. He said, Daniel, tomorrow I want you to speak on this. And so I sat right there and I argued with God for a little while, and He won, and just convinced me that His way is much better than mine. So we're going to talk about godly discipline in a couple of weeks. But this morning I want to talk about this, a passage that's been on my heart. I don't know if you realize this or not, but back in 1929, the first group of believers met just across the road in this little schoolhouse, and they eventually called themselves Good Hope Baptist Church. And the reason that they began is that some of the teachers and some of the school leaders over there realized that there was no church out here. And so they were very burdened for the children and parents of this community that had no access to the gospel, that weren't hearing the gospel, that they couldn't go to a church. And so they started Good Hope Baptist Church over there, and then eventually moved over here in 1931 and officially became chartered as Good Hope Baptist Church. And so when I came here in late 2011, 2012, you know, I was really intrigued. That was the first thing that I wanted to do, is just find out the history of this church. And so one of the things that I was told was that this building was put up about 9-10 years ago, and that there was still a debt on this building. And so immediately we began to talk. You know, how can we be debt free? Now, I don't know if you remember September of 2012. You know, I've learned that a lot of the really good ideas that I have, spur of the moment, probably should be more thought out. Remember in September, those of you that were here in September of 2012, I rented this huge tent, and we were going to have church on location. Shannon Hawkins, you be quiet. Shannon was out there helping me shovel cow poop the day before. And if you remember, it was going to be great. We were going to have one service under there. We were going to kick off this final campaign, celebrate the vision, the vision that they had back in 1929 to reach this community for Jesus. And we had the I Found Hope shirt. Somebody was wearing one. Andy was wearing one this morning. And so, it was a great thing. I don't know if you remember or not, but that was like the rainiest day that I've ever experienced in Iva. They had just had, I don't know if you remember, but they had just had the rodeo over here. And Josiah and me and somebody else, maybe even Brad Young, were standing out in the parking lot watching campers spin out. They were stuck in the mud. And I just was like, and I thought this was a great idea. But we met in here. We started the campaign. We had these little booklets, if you remember. And I know that Jamie and Robbie had done financial pushes and stuff like that to get us out of debt. And you remember that day? You probably don't. But I preached out of Nehemiah. And I told the story of Good Hope Baptist Church, written by Miss Wansley back in the early 80s, or maybe it was the 60s, I don't remember. But she and Miss Cora Gray had written the history of this church, and I found it upstairs. And so I compared that story to the story of Nehemiah, the prophet Nehemiah, and how he went back and he rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem. And so we kicked it off. And if you remember, I challenged us to be thinking in terms like this. Not what a huge amount of money or what a big debt, but what is this debt keeping us from? Debt's never a good thing. Sometimes it's necessary, I guess, when you have to pay a building. And I'm thankful for those that made the decision to build this, that they had most of the money already in the bank. And so the church did not have to borrow as much money. And so we got this nice fancy thermometer. And from day one, it was actually claimed by Kelly Fortner as the official colorer. So if you'll come on with your marker, I couldn't find the stickers. So if you see blue stickers anywhere, please turn them in and we'll fill this in. But if you'll send that all the way to the top, because folks, our church is debt free. You can just write debt free. She just said this is going to take forever. But we just praise God for that. As of this coming week, we'll make the final payment on our mortgage, and I am just super, super excited about what God is going to do. We started out this year. Thank you, Vanna. Thank you. I meant to tell you not to stand too close to that. That's pretty potent. But you know, we started this year out calling it the best year ever. And 2015, I've prayed and challenged you to think about 2015 as being the best year ever in terms of this could be the year that changes the rest of your life. This could be the year that shapes. Maybe this is not going to be the year you get rich or the year you don't have any problems with your spouse or with your kids or with your car or with your refrigerator. I'm not talking about materialism or things like that. But I just want us to think in terms of, could this year be the year that shapes the rest of our life, that makes the rest of our life so much better in our church, as a church, and in our families. And so thanks to your faithfulness and just some wisdom within the leadership and our finance team, we sat there at the finance team meeting in January, and Jim White said, looking at the numbers, we could pay this off. And there was absolutely no question in our minds that that's what we wanted to do, because we know that God is most honored when his people aren't in debt. And when we don't owe, you know, the borrower is slave to the lender. And so I want you to make plans on March the 1st, the first Sunday in March. I don't care what you got going on, scratch it. Be here. We're going to have one service that morning. Our children are going to be in here. They're going to sing. We're putting together a special video. I've spent a lot of time this week researching and getting old pictures that I've dug up from the earth of the first gathering of believers at Good Hope. We're going to put together a special video with some interviews from some of our longtime members. I messed up a few weeks ago and said older members, and I was chastised for that. Some of our longtime members, because if I were to take a poll, I would guarantee you 95 to 97% of our church family does not know the history of Good Hope Baptist Church. We don't know where we've been, the things that have happened over the last 80 years or so. And so that Sunday is just going to be a celebration Sunday. We're going to burn the mortgage note that day, and the deacons have had to curtail me a little bit. I wanted confetti cannons and indoor fireworks, but they pulled the reins back a little bit. Yeah, Dakota, you with me, buddy? All right, we'll make it happen. And so who knows? We're just going to have a great celebration day that day, and we're going to have a meal to follow. But we'll get you more details. We're going to eat together and just celebrate what God has done. And so that's really the first big announcement that I had for you today. And the second one is this: when I got to Good Hope, I said, you know, we got to pay this debt off. And the second thing that I wanted to do, I was shot straight out of seminary, and I'm so thankful. I've told many of my friends back home in Alabama that Good Hope is a unicorn. And they're like, what? And I said, okay, it's a rural church, but a very contemporary church. And they're like, we don't believe you. I said, people don't believe me about unicorns either. And they're full of grace and mercy, because, you know, over the last 3 years, going on 4 years now, I've made some pretty boneheaded decisions, like renting a tent. And you've been full of grace and understanding and mercy, and some of you men have said, why don't we think about doing it this way? But the Lord, during my time in seminary before I got here, just really placed within my heart a great passion for missions. Now, don't think automatically missions means getting on an airplane and going somewhere. No, that means missions is literally just telling people about Jesus. Whether it's here in Iva, Star, Anderson, whether it's in America, whether it's overseas. In other words, God just really transformed my heart, and that's what I wanted to do. When I got here, in the back of my head, I've always had it in the back of my head, I said, you know what? I want to use the model for missions at Good Hope. Now, it's taken us a few years to get there, but because, just as God is my witness, when we decided we're going to pay this thing off, the ball just started rolling, and God began to put some things in place, not me. And it was just amazing how God said, you've been faithful with this, let's see next level. So, Clay, if you'll put that verse up, Acts chapter 1, verse 8. Pastors, theologians, missiologists have all said that, you know, this is kind of the model for missions in the local church. Jesus is getting ready to go back up into heaven. He's ascending. He's finished his ministry, death, resurrection. And he tells his disciples this. He says, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses. You will tell people about me everywhere, in Jerusalem, throughout Judea, in Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. So, you look at this, and a lot of pastors throughout history and theologians have said, this is a great model for the local church. What worked for the disciples should work for the local church. And so they've categorized this into three three distinct areas: Jerusalem and throughout Judea. That would be local missions. That's where the disciples were. That's reaching into the community around them with the gospel of Jesus. Then Jesus said, you go into Samaria. That would be that was a town about an hour driving distance away from Jerusalem. That was kind of your national missions. It was in the same region, but that's kind of your national missions. So you start home, move out, then he says to the ends of the earth. It's international missions. The church should be engaged. A healthy church, a church that is marked and defined by the gospel of Jesus, will be reaching into their community, into the nation, and into the uttermost parts of the earth. Now, what do we do here at Little Old Iva? Well, my heart, since I've been the pastor here, is to one day be able for our church to consistently do all three of these. We've not been able to do that yet. We haven't been to a place yet, but this year, 2015, the best year ever. So you've got three opportunities this year, church. The first one, Clay, if you'll put it up, it's going to happen on spring break. We're going to have a week of local intentional missions. We're partnering with Shiloh Baptist Church. Pastor John Davis down there, he and I have been getting together. We're going to meet this week. And for 3 days over spring break, it's not going to take up your whole spring breaks. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, we're going to reach into the local community. And students, get plugged into this. Adults, if you can, if you're not working those days, or if you can, you got some vacation days, check this out. We're going to be doing anything from building wheelchair ramps, to housework for people in the community, to even doing maybe some outreach for kids in our community with sports camp or Bible school, something like that. But we are going to intentionally focus on this community those 3 days. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to give up on our backyard Bible school this summer. We're still going to do that. But for these few days, we're going to minister to Jerusalem, to Star Iva, to our local missions. Then, in the summertime, we're going to take it next level. You have an opportunity, and I should have changed the font, but I didn't do that. Can you even see that? Can you see the screen for this big old honking thing? Sorry. So excited I left it there. We're going to take a mission trip to Ohio. Now, I know we had announced a while back that we would be going to New York, but that fell through. In other words, the guy never called me back. So, God just sovereignly brought this all together. We're going to be working with Pastor Ted Hall in the Akron, Ohio area, doing some block parties, some sports camps, some Bible school for kids. But from June the 29th through July the 3rd, we're going to be going to the Akron, Ohio area to do local ministry to help this pastor and his church out. Up there and in other parts of this country, it's a lot different than in the Bible Belt, okay? People really don't care much about Jesus. And for the most part, a lot of people don't care about Jesus in the South either. But we're going to be helping Pastor Ted that week. The cost for that should be around $100 to $150. That's cheap. That's basically covering our transportation and a couple of things while we're up there. And then, so that's Samaria. That's North America. And then finally, September the 18th to the 22nd, you have an opportunity to go with our church to Honduras with Hannah Vernon, who was here a while back, friends of Eric and Amy Gurley. They went with them. But we will be working in the orphanage and doing some kids clubs in the local village. The cost for that is roughly around $1,600. Now, before you freak out and before you use the fear excuse, I can't afford that. Just from personal experience, what God's done in my life. If God is placing on your heart that He wants you to go, money will not be a problem. He will provide. You watch. If you commit and you say, God, I'm going to give up a week of my life to go serve you. This is what I feel like you're leading me to do, whether it's in Ohio, whether it's in Honduras, whether it's for a few days in Star Iva, God will honor that. And you will be amazed by how He provides. If God's in it, He's not going to let you down. Our God's faithful. So I know that seems like a significant amount of money, but listen to me. I don't think God can't afford anything. And He will move in the hearts of His people to send a team. So we've got 3 sign-up sheets in the back this morning on the back table for those. If you're interested in those, put your name, your email address down, and we'll get the ball rolling on that starting for spring break. But I'm hoping, I'm praying that this begins a cycle in our church where every year we're devoting ourselves to local missions, North American missions, and international missions. We're not just talking about it. We're not just sending money. We're sending people. We're sending hands. We're sending feet of the gospel. Which brings us to Acts chapter 8. And this is a passage that I have challenged you as a church to embrace and to make the identity of Good Hope Baptist Church. That if our church is going to be known for one thing, I think this is what we should be known for. In Acts chapter 7, this guy named Stephen, who was a deacon in the early church, you know, in past Southern Baptist life, being a deacon was like prestigious. You know, that was like a high rank in society. Not in the early church. You got killed for doing it. So, how many of you want to sign up for September, guys? Stephen was martyred. Does anybody remember who was over his execution, who approved of it? A guy named what? Saul, who eventually turned into Paul, the greatest missionary this world's ever seen. And so, as soon as Stephen dies in Acts chapter 7, chapter 8, Luke tells us that he just began to wreak havoc with his cronies. He hated Jesus. He hated the new church movement. He hated everything to do with it. And so they went door to door, house to house, synagogue to synagogue, and dragged out every man, woman, and child who claimed to be following Jesus and either murdered them or put them in jail. Then watch what happens in chapter 8, verse 4. Now those who were scattered, these are people who were running for their lives because they would not deny Jesus. They went about preaching the word. Now let's stop there for just a second. How many of us, I don't want you to raise your hand. How many of you have shared the gospel with someone in the last year? Don't raise your hand. How many people have you shared the gospel with in the last year? I'm ashamed to tell you, for me personally. And we live in a free country where there's nobody out to kill us. And we don't even open our mouths. These folks were running for their lives for opening their mouths, and you know what they did? They just kept opening them anyway. And you know, we're all, and I might make some enemies today, but you know, I see on Facebook, I see on the internet all the time, Christians standing up for our rights. You know what? Maybe what we need in this country is a little persecution. Because you look at most countries in the world where the gospel is spreading, it's the one where Christianity is illegal. That's where the gospel is exploding. So maybe what would be good for us as comfortable Christians is a little heat. But these folks were scattered, running for their lives, and they were preaching the gospel. Verse 5, Philip went down to the city of Samaria and proclaimed them to Christ. And proclaimed to them Christ. Verse 6, and the crowds with one accord paid attention to what was being said by Philip when they heard him and saw the signs that he did. For unclean spirits, crying out with a loud voice, came out of many who had them, and many who were paralyzed or lame were healed. So there was much joy in that city. That's the passage that I've challenged our church to make our identity. Is there much joy in this community because of the gospel's work in and through us? In our little Facebook group, Good Hope group, I posted an article this week that I read by a guy named Darren Patrick, who's a pastor in St. Louis. And he asked this question that I ask myself all the time. He said this: if your church ceased to exist tomorrow, what loss would be felt by the community? If your church ceased to exist tomorrow, what loss would be felt by the community? In other words, if tomorrow morning you woke up and I gave you a phone call and I said, listen, don't worry about coming back to church. You need to find another place to worship. All our buildings are burned to the ground. We've disbanded. We've decided it's not worth it anymore. So you need to go somewhere. Good Hope Baptist Church no longer exists. If we were to go down to Star, Iowa, with a camera, microphone, and we were to interview people who were unchurched, and we said, what would you miss most? What will you miss most about Good Hope Baptist Church? What would they say? What would they say? If our church ceased to exist, what would be the loss felt by this church, by this community? See, this is a question, again, that I'm constantly asking myself, because it is the greatest indicator that I can think of what kind of eternal kingdom impact we're having in this community. Because listen to me, in 1929, this church came into existence for no other reason but to send the gospel to people that didn't have an opportunity to hear. Did you hear that? This church was not organized for families to get together and be comfortable with one another and love on each other, pet each other, tell each other how good they are, and gossip about everything else, and then go home once a week. This church exists from day one for the express purpose of telling people about Jesus. That's why we were started, and that's where we're going. And if we ever do anything else, then we've gotten away from the Scriptures and our purpose as a church, period. That's why this church exists. Listen to me. God planted this church here 80-something years ago for one reason. And God has brought you and your family here for one reason. Now, sure, maybe you joined here. You're thinking about joining here because kids ministry, because of atmosphere, because of friends, because of family. Maybe you had a choice in that, but listen to me. Ultimately, God sovereignly placed you here. He chose for you to go here. God has brought you here for a reason. He's called together this particular group of believers, including myself, as Esther would say, for such a time as this. Because listen to me. There are people that aren't here right now and aren't in any other church in this town who are living in our community. You will see them today. You will run into them today, tomorrow, and this week, who are lost and dying and going to hell. What are we doing about it? What are we doing about it? So the question I want to ask you this morning is Good Hope Baptist Church bringing much joy to this city because of the powerful, liberating work of the gospel in and through us? Are we bringing much joy to this community? How can we do that? How can we live out, going forward, how can we live out the gospel purposes, God's purposes for this church, for our families? Well, based on Acts chapter 8, verse 8, I think we see a few things. And the first one is in verse 4, and the first one is this: every member must be a minister. Every member must be a minister. Look at verse 4. Now those who were scattered went about preaching the word. It didn't say a select few. It didn't say the leaders of the church. Everyone who was called a Christian, who was persecuted for their faith, all of them went from town to town, wherever they went, preaching the gospel. If our church, if Good Hope Baptist Church is going to have the full potential kingdom impact in this community, every single member of our church must embrace and live out the Great Commission. We've got to. Listen, we've got this mentality in churches today, and I'm not saying it's this church, I'm just saying it's ordinarily true. I grew up in the church. I grew up a preacher's kid. I know, okay? You can't pull the wool over my eyes. But there's this mentality that exists that certain people, and if I could do away with this term, I would, are called to the ministry. And it's those who are specially called to the ministry that ministry is for. Not me. That's the preacher's job. He went to seminary. He was called to ministry. Nothing could be further from the truth. Listen to me. You pay me to be your pastor. And I'm very thankful for that. So are my kids. But a lot of times in churches, we get this mentality, man, he's the paid employee. He's the one that should be doing it. Man, he's the one that needs to go out witnessing and doing all that. It's his job. Listen to me. If you're a follower of Jesus, you're called to be on mission with Jesus. Just because I'm a pastor doesn't mean it's my job alone. Every follower of Jesus is called into the Great Commission. When you personally surrendered your life to Christ, I want you to think back to that moment you got saved. You weren't just signing up for eternal fire security. It's not just to get out of hell for free. I'm going to ask Jesus into my heart, get wed in the baptistry so that one day when I die, I'm going to get out of hell, get to heaven, whatever. Biblically speaking, following Jesus Being saved means you are signing up and placing your life in allegiance to Him under His lordship and authority, saying, I will follow you, I'll be obedient to you, and I'll join you on mission wherever I am, whatever I'm doing. The Great Commission is not for the select few. That's what biblical Christianity is, folks. I've read the Bible for a long time now, and I've never once seen in the Bible a non-missional Christian. They don't exist. You ever heard of an oxymoron? That's one. My 5-year-old yesterday in the car, Sadie, she announced to me that she's about to become a Christian. I said, now what? She said, I'm about to become a Christian. And I said, okay. You want to be a Christian? Yeah, one day. I said, well, what does being a Christian mean? And she said, you got to be old like you and Mom. And I said, whoa boy. But I got to share with her. I said, listen, no. I'm not old. But I've walked very carefully, because what do we do is a lot of times as parents, and inside of a good intentions and heart, you want to be a Christian, honey, you pray this prayer. You just pray this prayer right now, and then you'll get to go to heaven one day. You know, I told Sadie, I said, listen, baby, you just keep loving Jesus. And one day, we'll understand together. I said, because listen to me, I don't want my child to just think that asking Jesus into her heart is what the Bible says. That's nowhere in the Bible, folks. The sinner's prayer, if you can find it, show me, please. Because following Jesus means surrendering my life, my desires, my whole heart to Him and Him alone, following Him on mission and making Him the Lord of my life. And that's what my kids, I hope, understand before they go through the motions. I think that's what's wrong with a lot of churches today. They're full of people who just said a prayer. Biblically speaking, every member is a minister. You know, I'd never seen this before until a few weeks ago when I was reading Matthew chapter 9. Matthew chapter 9, Jesus is standing with His disciples. It's one of the greatest evangelistic passages you see in the Bible. Jesus is with His disciples, and all these hundreds of people are coming, and they're sick, and He's ministering to them. And you remember what Jesus said? He says He looked out on the crowds, and He had compassion on them. And then I can just picture Jesus saying, all right, boys, you see all these people? He said, the fields are white for harvest. Then He said this, pray to the Lord of the harvest that He would send laborers into the field. And I never thought about it in terms like this, but think about it. That was Jesus Christ Himself, the Messiah. The one that could go out and tell everybody at one time. He could click His fingers and everybody would be saved. Everybody would be healed. This is the Messiah. But what is He doing? He's saying, guys, no, I'm not going to be here for much longer. This is your ministry. And He sent the 12 out. He actually sent 72 out in pairs. The point of that is, folks, it's not one person's job. It's the whole body of Christ's job to go and make disciples. Every member must be a minister. The second thing that I see in this passage I want to show you is that ministry must always be a marriage between word and deed. Ministry must always be a marriage between word and deed. Look at verses 5 and 6. Philip went down to the city of Samaria, proclaimed to them the Christ, and the crowds with one accord paid attention to what was being said by Philip when they heard him and they saw the signs that he did. He was preaching the gospel. But look what it says. It says they paid attention when they heard the message and they saw the signs. They heard and they saw. You ever heard that old adage that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care? Folks, this community, people that don't know Jesus in Star and Iva, they don't care how many different Bible verses or programs we got. They want to know that somebody cares about them. Why do you think Jesus didn't just stand there and preach all the time, but He went into the heart of the broken? He went into the home of the sinner. He went to where they were. See, it's so easy to be inward focused that we become totally oblivious to the death all around us. And I mean people who are dying and lost and going to hell. Listen, we'll just be honest for a second. We live in a completely different age than the church lived in 30, 40 years ago. Okay? People aren't just, now, there are some exceptions. You may be one of them. But people who are lost, more than likely, are not just going to waltz into your church. I'm looking for Jesus. That's not how it works. Folks, we struggled with this here at Good Hope. And we had a food pantry ministry for a few years. And we wrestled with that because we felt like we weren't making any eternal impact in some of these folks' lives, and it was being taken advantage of and all that. One of the passages that we went to was in John. Jesus fed the 5,000. You remember what it says? It says it. 15,000 people showed up one day to hear Jesus preach. They were spiritually hungry. But what did Jesus do? He physically fed them. The next day, that same crowd shows up with even more. And they're like, we got a place where we can get free food. This guy, Jesus, he'll turn it all into food. And what did Jesus do? He taught them. Well, Jesus, where's our food? You ain't going to get any food today. See, when they were spiritually hungry, he physically fed them. And when they were physically hungry, he spiritually fed them. Folks, our proclamation always must be married with feet. That's why Isaiah says, blessed are the feet that carry the good news, the hands and the feet. There has to be a balance. Yes, the gospel being proclaimed is our number one objective. But listen to me. You want an open audience to the gospel? You want a one-on-one, somebody who you can share Jesus with? You go put a wheelchair ramp on somebody's house, and you got an open audience. You feed the hungry, they'll listen to you. Now, they're not all going to receive. They're not all going to believe. But you know what? Jesus is the perfect example of this. He could have easily spoken the word and said, hey, everybody come to this town. I'm preaching 10 nights a week. 10 nights a week. That's ridiculous. Every night of the week. Y'all aren't going to catch that till I said something. Somebody would watch it on YouTube and be like, did he just say that? And they just expect everybody to show up. But what did Jesus do? Oh, Jesus went up into somebody's house and had dinner with prostitutes, pimps, and all of these horrible people that we would call those people. That's what Jesus did. Then earned him credibility. You know what? It's so much easier for us to sit in these padded seats with the air conditioner in the summer, the heat in the winter, drive, park, bring our family to church. It's so easy to do that than it is to move outside the four walls of this church, than it is to engage with people. It's so easy to come and be fed rather than to go and serve. Ministry must always be a marriage between word and deed. And then finally, ministry is always going to be messy. Ministry will be messy. Look at all the people that they had to quote unquote deal with. Look at this. For unclean spirits were crying out with a loud voice. They had demon-possessed people showing up at their church. They had paralytics showing up at their church. People who hadn't moved for years, who had bed sores, who stunk, who couldn't clean themselves. Okay? The lame were coming. The people that were showing up to the church in Samaria when he was preaching, these were not your white-collar, minivan driving, white middle-class suburban families, folks. Okay? These were the rejects. These were the absolute lowest of the low. These were those people. You know those people? Listen, Jesus attracts all types of people. What did Jesus say in the Gospel of John? When the Son of Man is lifted up, he will draw all people to himself. Black, white, rich, poor, homeless, rich. It doesn't matter. I go back to that dinner party that Jesus went to. And around the table are all the sinners, all the people who were the rejects, all the people who were hated. And who had a problem with Jesus sitting there eating lunch with them? Who was it? The Pharisees, man, they're outside the window going, who is this guy? He's not a good follower of God. He's associating with those people. And thankfully, I don't think overall this is, I'm so thankful to be in a church like Good Hope where this is overall not the mentality, but we struggle with this, people. Our hearts are wicked because within church, I've seen over my life, you've kind of got the inner circle, right? And you have those people that show up, and you've got to get cleaned up. You got to get your act together. You got to do certain things and talk certain ways before we let you into this inner circle. We're going to keep you on the fringes. Like, we're going to let you come, and we're going to be cool with that. Why? So that we can look at each other and pat each other on the back and go, man, we're really an outreaching church. Look at who we're attracting. But not one of us will get into the lives of the drug addict, into the lives of the prostitute, and say, let me walk with you and love you and show you Jesus. Why? Well, that's the preacher's job. Well, they're not really serious yet. Who was the last person? If you've been saved for over 5 years, who was the last person you discipled? Who was the last person you discipled? This is the Great Commission. Making disciples. You know what I'm learning? I've learned this in my ministry here. That if you want to really minister to the messed up people, you first have to understand and realize and admit that you're the most messed up person you've ever met. You're the most messed up person you've ever met. This is why Paul was so effective. What did Paul say? I'm the chief of all sinners. I'm the nastiest of the nastiest. What should our church look like? It should be a church where every member is a minister. It should be a church where ministry is always married with word and deed. And it should be a messy place. It should be a messy place. Look what it says. The lame were brought. But what happened to the lame? Somebody tell me. What happened to the lame? They were healed. They brought paralyzed people. What happened to the paralyzed people? They were healed. They brought demon-possessed people. What happened to the demon-possessed people? They were healed. Last night at midnight, I was walking through the halls of the ER at ANMED. And the ER at ANMED at midnight is a messy place. Saw a guy brought in on a stretcher right next to me who just died of a heart attack. Car wreck victims being brought in one right after another. Families weeping, crying. I'm there with Charlie and Gail and little Cole, Katie. Little boy that's just lost his mom. You know what Good Hope Baptist Church must be? We should be a trauma unit. We exist to be a trauma unit. Where the grace of God, the gospel is working in such a way, a powerful way, that the hurting, that the broken, that those who are battling demons of their own can come in and be healed by the blood of Jesus. We've got nothing to offer this world but Jesus. Folks, we don't have a lot of money. We're in a poor area. We don't have a lot of highly educated people. We don't have all the glitz and the glamour of some other churches. We don't have the following of some other church. Listen to me. God has placed Good Hope Baptist Church in this town for one reason and one reason only. And that is so that there would be much joy in this community because of the gospel. Would you bow your heads as our worship team comes?